What happens inside the walls of the most dangerous prison in the U.S., Parchman Farm? The storm rolled across the Mississippi Delta like a warning, lightning cracking over endless fields of cotton and razor wire. Parchman Farm sat in the middle of it all, its long barracks and squat brick buildings rising from the mud like a forgotten military base. But tonight, something was wrong. Officers rushed across the compound, radios hissing, boots splashing through puddles. An inmate was down, found face down in the long corridor of Unit 29, the most dangerous block in the entire prison. By the time investigators arrived, rain hammered the tin roofs so loudly they could barely hear each other. But they didn't need sound to sense it. The tension was thick, the kind that came from being watched. Parchman had always been a place of whispers, where inmates and staff lived in a kind of mutual fear. But this felt different. The hallway where the body lay was too quiet, too clean, too staged, as if someone had taken their time. Lieutenant Harris knelt beside the inmate's body, shining his flashlight over the concrete. No blood, no sign of struggle. One shoe was missing. No cameras covered this part of Unit 29, one of the many blind spots documented in federal reports over the years. And the only witnesses were locked behind steel doors, their faces hidden in darkness. There were no alarms? Harris murmured. No movement, another officer said. Nothing on the sensors. That was impossible. Nothing happened in Unit 29 without someone hearing something. Not at Parchman. The prison had been under scrutiny for decades. Fires, riots, overcrowding, collapsing ceilings, and a history that refused to stay buried. People had called for its closure. Others insisted they needed it. But inside the walls, none of that mattered. Survival did. Thunder boomed as investigators began canvassing the block. Doors rattled as they passed. Some inmates shouted over the storm, demanding answers. Others stayed silent, their eyes following every movement. Harris paused at a cell with peeling paint and a rusted bunk. Gang markings were scratched into the walls, faded by years of sweat and fear. Parchman wasn't just a prison, it was a battlefield. Territory. Power. Bloodlines. Everyone belonged to someone. A young officer stopped at the end of the hallway. "Sir, you need to see this." Harris followed, stepping into the cracked shower room. Water dripped from a broken pipe, puddling on the floor. The missing shoe sat neatly in the corner, placed with intention. "What does this mean?" an officer whispered. "It means," Harris said, "that this didn't happen here." He turned slowly, listening to the hiss of water and the rumble of thunder. The inmate hadn't been killed in the hallway. He had been moved. Carried. Someone wanted them to look in the wrong place. And someone inside this block had the reach and the confidence to do it. When they opened a maintenance crawlspace behind the showers, the air shifted. It smelled like old dust and cold earth. Footprints led into the dark. Harris's beam followed the narrow passage, illuminating pipes, rotting wood, and the faint outline of a handprint smeared on the wall. But it was the sound, soft, metallic, deliberate, that froze him. A steel panel deeper inside the tunnel slammed shut. Someone had been watching them. Someone had just sealed a door. And someone inside Parchman Farm knew exactly how to move through the hidden bones of this century-old prison. Harris stepped back, heart pounding. Because whatever was happening here was only the beginning. "Unit 29 is compromised," he whispered. "And whoever did this isn't done." The storm faded by morning, but inside Parchman Farm, the air felt heavier than the rain-soaked fields outside. Word had already traveled through the compound. Someone in Unit 29 had slipped into the old maintenance tunnels, places so forgotten even long-time officers rarely mention them. But rumors did. Stories about inmates disappearing into the walls, moving between barracks without ever crossing a main hallway. Tales dismissed as prison folklore. Until now. Lieutenant Harris met with the warden in a cramped office overlooking the fields. The windows rattled from the wind, and a thin line of water leaked from the frame, dripping into a rusted trash can. It was the perfect symbol of Parchman, worn down, neglected, and dangerous. "You're telling me an inmate vanished through a hole in the wall?" the warden snapped. "No," Harris replied. "I'm telling you he was moved. And whoever moved him knew this place better than we do. The warden's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about one inmate, this was about control. About the illusion of order inside a place that had survived riots, lawsuits, federal investigations, and decades of scandal. If Unit 29 was compromised, the entire prison was in danger. They entered the security hub, where grainy cameras flickered across outdated monitors. Some feeds were black. Others froze every few seconds. A technician clicked through the recordings with frustration. "These cameras have blind spots we can't fix without shutting down the entire block," he said. "Convenient," Harris muttered. One frame caught his attention, 2:14 a.m. A figure at the far end of the hallway, still, faint, almost ghost-like. The timestamp glitched. The figure blurred. Then the feed cut out. "That's the exact moment the hallway went quiet," the technician added. "And right before the inmate was moved." Harris leaned closer. The figure didn't act like an inmate. The posture was too controlled. Too calm. Whoever stood there knew exactly where the cameras failed. "Pull every name assigned to night duty," Harris said. But when the technician opened the logbook, entire sections were missing, torn out. Someone was removing evidence. By midday, officers swept Unit 29. Doors slammed open, inmates pressed against walls, and the tension erupted into shouting. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone claimed innocence. But one name kept emerging. An inmate known as Monroe. Not the biggest. Not the loudest. But respected, feared quietly. Officials had once suspected he coordinated contraband routes through the farm buildings, but nothing was proven. He had worked in maintenance years earlier. He knew the tunnels. When Harris approached Monroe's cell, the inmate looked up slowly, calm despite the chaos outside. "You think I dragged a man through the walls?" Monroe said, his voice steady. "I think you know how someone could," Harris replied. Monroe smirked. "People disappear in Parchman all the time, Lieutenant. Some because they want to. Some because someone else wants them to." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And some because the prison needs them to." Harris stared at him. "What does that mean?" Monroe pointed toward the floor. This place was built like a plantation. Tunnels, crawl spaces, root cellars. Old things buried under new things. You start opening doors down there, you won't like what crawls out. Before Harris could respond, an alarm shrieked through the block. "Emergency in the boiler room," a voice yelled over the radio. "Unauthorized access." Harris sprinted through the corridors, officers following close behind. Steam poured from cracked pipes as they entered the boiler room, a massive, rust-stained space beneath the barracks. Water dripped from overhead valves, echoing through the chamber. A panel on the far wall hung open. Fresh footprints in the dust. And a message scratched into the metal with something sharp. "You're looking in the wrong place." Harris felt the hairs on his neck rise. Whoever they were chasing wasn't running. They were leading him. For the rest of the day, the message etched into the metal panel echoed in Lieutenant Harris's mind. "You're looking in the wrong place." It wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. By evening, the search expanded beyond Unit 29. Officers swept the old barns, the abandoned field shacks, and the weather-beaten storage sheds that leaned like tired ghosts over cracked concrete. But the missing inmate wasn't the only concern anymore. Monroe's comment about Parchman's buried secrets had rattled Harris more than he wanted to admit. That night, Harris returned to the boiler room alone. The hum of machinery vibrated through the floor. He knelt near the open wall panel, brushing his hand across the fresh footprints in the dust. They didn't lead toward an exit. They circled, almost like the person had been waiting. Then he noticed something he had missed earlier, a faint draft pushing through the back of the panel. He pressed against the metal, and with a reluctant groan, the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage coated in peeling paint. A maintenance shaft. Abandoned. And not on any modern blueprint. He flicked on his flashlight and stepped inside. For several minutes, he followed the shaft's cramped path, the air growing colder and heavier. Pipes ran overhead like tangled steel vines. Water dripped rhythmically, echoing down the tunnel in slow metallic taps. Finally, the space widened into a chamber, An old root cellar dating back to when Parchman had operated like a prison plantation. Rusted tools lay forgotten on the floor. Wooden beams sagged overhead. And in the corner, a single bulb hung from an exposed wire, its light flickering weakly. Someone had been here recently. A folded shirt lay neatly on a crate. A tin cup. A small notebook with no cover. Harris opened it carefully. Only a few pages remained, filled with lines of numbers, dates, coordinates, hallway codes, patrol schedules. Whoever wrote this had been studying the prison the way an architect studies a blueprint. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind him. "You found it." Harris spun around. Monroe stood at the entrance to the chamber, hands behind his back, posture calm. "How did you get down here?" Harris demanded. "There's more than one way," Monroe replied. "And you should know, this place wasn't built to keep people in. It was built to keep things quiet." Harris stepped between him and the entrance. "You knew about this tunnel. You used it." Monroe shook his head. "Not this time. But someone did. Someone who understood Parchman better than any of us." Harris narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Monroe's expression didn't change. "The missing inmate wasn't trying to escape the prison, Lieutenant. He was escaping someone inside it." Before Harris could question him further, the radio at his belt crackled violently. "Lieutenant Harris, come in. We've found him, the missing inmate. He's in Barracks C. He's alive." Harris froze. "Alive?" "Yes, sir. He walked in through the back door. Said he had to come back." Harris shoved past Monroe and hurried down the tunnel, climbing into the boiler room. Officers waited outside with urgent expressions. When Harris reached Barracks C, the inmate sat quietly on a bunk, head lowered, hands clasped. No signs of injury. No signs of struggle. Just silent exhaustion. "Where were you?" Harris asked. The inmate lifted his eyes slowly. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I wasn't running from here. I came back because it's safer inside." Harris frowned. "Safer from who?" The inmate swallowed hard. "Someone who can walk through this prison without opening a door." Harris felt a cold ripple crawl down his spine. Before he could ask anything else, the inmate added one final sentence, a whisper barely louder than the hum of the lights. "And he's still down there." Harris stepped back. Monroe's warning. The message scratched into the metal. The shadow on the camera at 2:14 a.m. The case wasn't solved. It had only begun. And inside Parchman Farm, where history, secrecy, and danger lived in the walls, Harris realized the most terrifying truth. Some mysteries weren't meant to escape.